Hello, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Compliance. This is the show that gives you more VIP access than groupies at a Harry Styles concert to the impacts and insights surrounding the process manufacturing industry. For those of you joining Beyond Compliance for the first time, welcome. This is your series. It's kind of like a music festival. It's designed to help you shape strategies to grow your business and consistently deliver quality products, mitigate supply chain risks, safeguard your brand, and of course, improve yield and maximize productivity. Are you ready? My name is Jim Albright. I'm from Safety Chain. We're the sponsors of Beyond Compliance, and I'll be your MC on this set, which will cover what might not be visible to you today that can help you more quickly identify and improve operational efficiencies in the future. So for those of you who are new to the show, we've muted all attendee mics, but fear not. You can enter in your comments and questions in the GoToWebinar panel at any time during the session, and we'll be sure to leave room at the end for our amazing speaker, Matt, who will answer them. And of course, we want to be flexible with our time, so if any questions can't get covered, we'll be sure to follow up with them very, very shortly. Oh, and yes, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the replay and the slides later today. All right, let's go meet our speaker. Unlike Harry Styles, Matt Snyder has over 20 years experience working in manufacturing facilities from poultry to plastics and has seen what the power of true continuous improvement strategy can do. Hey, Matt, I'm really looking forward to hearing about all of your experiences in managing quality, safety, and operations. And you definitely use this experience to help process manufacturers today maximize their line efficiency. So thank you so much for being part of Beyond Compliance today.
I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to get this thing kicked off and talk a little bit about that experience you're referencing and how I've used that to illuminate a few things in the operations that I've worked with and consulted for, and hopefully some folks on the line will get some of that, get some motivation or some inspiration out of this and use it to better their own
Right on.
organizations.
Let's dig in, my friend.
All right, so I'll go ahead and take over from here. Again, my name is Matt Snyder. I've been working around the beef, pork, and poultry further processing industries for about 20 years now in some way, shape, or form. Started out in quality, kind of worked my way through quality and food safety and some of the lab management side of things. So worked with some, mid to large size processors. And then I switched more of my full-time focus to operations and analytics. That really kind of propelled me into where I'm sitting now. But I did do a brief stint in R&D and plastics, and so all of that was for food grade and mostly food containers. And so there's a decent chance you've got something I worked on in your fridge right now, because our market penetration at the time was about 99.98%. So certainly a breadth of experience here, but also a breadth of just going into the plants every single day and fighting the fight and seeing the things and always with that mentality of trying to improve. So I've spent the last 5 or so years as a kind of a CI consultant of sorts, and now I sit here today talking to you all. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And with that, we'll go ahead and dig in. I do encourage questions to be added in the chat panel if at all possible, or if something comes to mind that you feel like you want to address a little bit later and remind yourself in our Q&A session, that's great as well. So we'll start this off with a quick poll. And this is kind of an interesting one for me, but this is to gauge the room. Are you able to tell me how your operation is performing currently, right now, without leaving your chair? We'll give this a, what do you say, Jim?
The votes are coming in. All right, looks like we're getting high participation. Oh, it's getting close. We've got more votes on the yes front, but it's fluctuating. We'll give it another few seconds here. All right. I'm about to close this poll, everybody. Let's see how we did. Yep. 65 said yes, 35%. No, not so much.
All right. Well, so the portion of this, um, a portion of this will speak very loudly to 35% of you, but also I think a large portion of it will reach out even into that 65% that's pretty confident that they've got an understanding of how their operation is performing right now. So we'll skip right into the main context. I appreciate everybody's engagement on the poll. It is very interesting to see some of the splits, and I would expect that number to be a little bit elevated from where it was, but good to see where it's at. And then I'd also expect reality to be a little bit probably lower than that 65% yes as well. And we'll go into some of the reasons I might think that, and some of the reasons that we're kind of gathered here today. And so, a quick overview for us, some of our objectives today. We really want to stress upon our listeners here the challenges that are associated with continuous improvement. What are some of the things that are getting in the way of continuous improvement? Some of those key blockers that kind of get in the way of the cultural shift that needs to happen to really have that CI mindset. So we'll be talking a little bit about labor. We'll be talking about that firefighting mentality. We'll be talking about some supply chain issues, and we'll be talking about increased demand that we've seen over the last couple of years, which has had a really interesting impact on some of the challenges that we see throughout the industry. And then we also want to talk about the impact of resources, and particularly how we are allocating our resources and how we are utilizing our resources. And are we doing that in a manner that is prioritized and efficient and effective? I think that is a very key concept to what we're going to talk about today, to make sure that the resources that we do have in a labor challenged market are being utilized appropriately. And then we'll talk about a kind of developing a smart approach to gaining operational efficiencies. And so by SMART, that's actually more of an acronym, should be all caps there, but we want to make sure that we're following kind of our specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based approach to managing some of these efficiencies. So we'll dive a bit more into detail on that as we go through the presentation here. All right, so first up, one of our challenges that we see consistently throughout the industry that we serve is lack of real-time visibility and understanding. As you can see from our initial poll, 35% can't really tell you how their operations are performing at this current moment. Now, I might wager that'd be a stretch. We could be a little bit higher than that as well, but that is a very specific challenge, and it's representative of the group that we've got on board today that are listening to this. And so that current state, lack of visibility, is something that we absolutely demand in industry, and we expect people to be held accountable for these results. As we go through the slide deck, if it catches up with me, we'll talk a little bit more about our low number of, how I would phrase, properly trained workers, and our high turnover of the labor pool that we've got. And then we'll talk about, again, effectively prioritizing existing resources. We really want to be able to drive the resources that we do have on the line to an effective use. And so we don't want a bunch of people standing around, obviously. We want to make sure that we are utilizing the people that we do have in the building. Their skill levels are properly leveraged and being efficiently managed. And so we want to talk, then we also want to talk about how we tend to be reliant on outdated processes. We'll dive into a bunch of kind of the Excel-based data capturing, going back and trying to put together trend analysis on historical action items that might or might not be reflective of what actually happened in the manufacturing facility that particular day. So this particular set of challenges is going to kind of frame up our conversation today. There is definitely a good mix of this throughout the groups that I have worked with. I have worked with some of the largest of the large and some of the smallest of the small, and everybody that I have dealt with in my time in the industry has had a decent bit of problems associated with each of these bullets here. So what do I mean when I talk about lack of real-time visibility and understanding of the current state? So some groups out there really are capturing a ton of data. They've got a great sophisticated SCADA system. They've got the ability to dive into the nitty gritty of all their PLCs and pull every single tag value that they've ever dreamt up. But how useful is that information? Is that information distilled into a way that helps you prioritize your resources, helps you organize about issues that you're having in the plant? Does it paint the actual picture of what is happening on each line? We need to go down the path in our continuous improvement journey to make sure that the data that we are capturing is consistent with the data we want to capture, but it's also telling us a story. That story is what's happening on the line. If we aren't comfortable with that information, then we can't really help prioritize how we get to a state of continuous improvement. And so a couple of the other things that we'll talk about here is the capacity management. So typically in an operation, and this is probably consistent across the board, maintenance tends to be a very heavily leaned upon department, but it tends to be a lower staffed area as well. And so how do we manage that group to better utilize their skilled training? Maybe you've got some automation engineers in the group that are required to update PLCs or run particular codes on systems in your network, but they're one of 3 or 4 people in the building that might be able to do it. How do we get to a better state where we're utilizing that resource particularly well, while freeing up some of their time by utilizing other resources that we have in the building as well? And then how are we viewing the downtime? Downtime to me is absolutely mission critical data, and it is something that we really as an organization want to understand. I want to know what problems are costing me money right now. I want to understand in my organization within these 4 walls, how are we doing relative to how we should be doing? And the biggest component of that tends to be downtime. What piece of equipment is costing me the most time today? What is costing me the most effort with my resources? Who is fighting what fires and why? And that to me is really important about understanding where we're at with real-time visibility and current state. If we don't have a good grasp on these bubbles here, then we're probably not as well heeled in the visibility department as we maybe could be. And that to me is a pretty big challenge in the industry, and I've seen it across the board. I think I passed my 183rd establishment that I've worked with just last week, and of the 183, I cannot confidently say any of them addresses all of these bubbles particularly well, and they tend to be fairly confident in some of the information they got. But if they're capturing a bunch of data, they're not confident in all of it. And so that's where we need to get down to the nitty gritty of what information are we capturing? Who is putting in that information? Is it manual or is it a machine driven code? Are we capturing it from PLCs? And then who's interpreting that data? Where is it going? How is it being reviewed? Are we talking about it in real time? Are we talking about it at the Monday kickoff meeting for the week after it all happened last week? And so, and speaking a little bit more about downtime here, one of my particular pet peeves in the industry is we tend to have a lot of estimates based upon recollection of operators. There are a lot of different things that we can do to capture downtime via machines, via PLCs. The system codes themselves can illuminate a few things, but oftentimes we'll have a report that's made by an operator who's doing not only their job, which is putting money in a box for the organization, but they're also being held accountable for the downtime that they're seeing in front of them. And so we put the onus on them to put the information on a piece of paper, and that information might be a recollection of, hey, I was down for 20 minutes today, but was that recollection correct? How do we make sure we're getting the best information out of that downtime as possible? And so to me, we'll talk a little bit about making sure that we're capturing the information at a critical element and using a resource to do so, but also engaging with the operator about why that downtime occurred. And so having a little bit of that machine and human interaction there, to me, is critical for us to actually get into this continuous improvement mindset. And so we will talk a little bit more about that. I'll go through a couple of examples later. And then understanding our downtime becomes extremely mission critical for resource utilization. We've got a labor force that is quite overextended. We have a very high demand situation. We've got a pretty high turnover situation. I have never worked in an operation that has less than 100% turnover year over year. I just haven't. It's been a consistent problem throughout this industry for as long as I can remember, and probably much longer than that. But I have still managed to have plants that continue to expand on their profitability, that continue to see improvements in their labor variance, even as that turnstile continues to just revolve. And so that the methodologies by which I did a lot of that stuff was making sure that my systems were capable of giving me the information that's critical to me, but also very critical to put in front of the operators themselves. Once we start demonstrating that we are concerned about the operation, once we start demonstrating that we're capturing this data, once we let the operators know on the floor that we've got a vested interest in what they're doing, they also seem to have an uptick in the amount of concern that they show for the operation itself, and the accountability becomes apparent. They start understanding why they're down. They start understanding the frequency with why they're down. And maybe a particular issue happens 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a day. Then they can start having a conversation about how frequent these things are happening. And that's how we shift the conversation to, you're just an operator on the floor, accountable for some metrics that you can't see necessarily, to an operator on the floor that has the ability to see why they're down, and also they have the expertise and the knowledge to understand how they can impact that. So whether that's a conversation with maintenance about the particular piece of machinery that's causing them problems, or whether that's a conversation about the changeover rates or the utilization rate of the piece of equipment involved, all of those things start happening as we get more real-time visibility and understanding of our current state. If we don't start with that current state, we don't have a good trust or understanding there. We tend to hang a lot of these folks out to dry, which then leads to frustration and turnover and all kinds of different labor issues, which we'll talk about on the next slide here. All right, and so another one of our continuous improvement challenges is certainly a low number of properly trained workers and high turnover of the labor force. How do you get people properly trained in an organization is completely independent to the process, completely up to you. I run very high-speed butcher lines that have a high degree of skill and also the highest potential for loss in our organization. As we're running, thousands of pounds of brisket per person per hour, I'm separating those into points and flats. I'm going through the process of actually having to trim these to my specifications for my finished product. That training mechanism there is so absolutely critical for the outcome of the plant. It directly affects the yields. My highest cost item in the plant is not my labor, it is my meat. It is the thing that I'm trying to get out for a profit. And that particular table, that particular segment alone can seal my day in the green, or it can seal my day in the red. And so we certainly have a an issue here. How do we get those people up, properly trained, and making sure that they are consistently delivering upon the specifications? And so when we talk about digital solutions, when we talk about best practices, ease of information, ease of access to information becomes very, very critical. And so talking about maintenance here, moving on to what we might call skilled workers who are in high demand. Some of our maintenance techs that have certifications, they can weld, they can program PLCs, they can do all of these different things. We tend to not have an overabundance of those folks in the facilities. That leads to specific challenges. Again, we're talking about maybe a group of 3 or 4 maintenance techs on a shift. That number then falls even lower on the off shifts. How do we start managing their time? How do we start making sure that their focus areas are the ones that are driving profitability in our system, in our organization? And so I know for a fact when I'm running a plant, what each one of my lines is costing me to run at that particular time, and then also what's the potential coming back into the facility based upon the output. So with that level of information, with that level of knowledge, I have an understanding of how to prioritize my maintenance folks. But also, I need to get maintenance involved in the conversation very early on about some of these issues so they can help us prioritize as well. They're the ones with the skills, they're the ones with the knowledge, and some of these things could be solved with a simple turning of a wrench that might be able to be passed on through a TPM style program to an operator. Whereas there are other things that do specifically require a certain skill set that maybe my operator does not have. And so we need to clearly define those things. How do we clearly organize about those things? And if we don't have the data to support the visuals, to support the prioritization, then we're just kind of having a subjective conversation that could go any which way. My emphasis here is to drive home the importance of that visibility to the data so we can help support those decisions with a kind of a logical data-backed approach that allows you to put real numbers to problems. If we're subjectively guessing, I think my butcher table was down for 20 minutes today due to a belt speed issue or due to a motor on the line, whatever it might have been that caused some issues on the conveyance. I need to know that very quickly, so I need to know who is the proper person to get over there and fix it. These things help us prioritize. The quick level of detail that is supplied by an automated type system is very, very critical to running an operation efficiently in today's age. Some other things that are contributing to the labor challenge that we're seeing today are obviously tough working conditions, long hours, and we've got quite a bit of repetitive tasks, and the nature of the business can be difficult. I ran meat plants for a number of years. The conditions in a meat plant are cold, wet, often pretty high speed, high stakes, and we are requiring a lot of these people. They make or break the business. That is where the money is put in the box. And so if we do not have a supportive environment where we're allowing these folks to have the level of detail that they need to be accountable for their operation, we really are setting ourselves a little bit back there. Now, this can be done through a number of different ways, and I've seen it done really well with non-digital systems. I've seen it done really well with digital systems, and I've seen it done poorly with both as well. And so the idea here is if we're going to support an organization, we need to have tools in place that allow for the quick upbringing of new operators, the quick upbringing of new talent that might be able to alleviate some of the burden from some of our less staffed departments that are a little bit higher skilled, that have a little bit different certification level, have a little bit different interest in the operation. And so we need to be able to manage that balance. And to do so, we need to be very effective at capturing the data that we've got in front of us, and also making that data readily available to those that it's important to. And oftentimes we get confused. We say, okay, that's very important to management. okay, that's very important to the senior level folks. How's that going to help the floor? If we're asking our floor folks, our operators, to be the primary point of putting money in a box, those folks should be as invested in the results, in that immediacy of the real-time data as we are. And so how do we get that best to them so they can help affect the change that's necessary to kind of drive the cultural elements that come in a continuous improvement culture? And so another point on labor here is one of the biggest things that I've seen consistently throughout the industry that I've spent the last 20-ish years in. Operator frustration is very high, and it's been high, and it remains high, and it tends to be driven by goals or performance expectations that they are held to, but they don't have very much visibility into it. And so part of our poll question, it's all well and good that 65% of our group here can see how they're performing, but I might rephrase that question a little bit to ensure, can 65% of the folks on our call comfortably say that our operators, the people that are putting the money in the box, are they capable of seeing real time how they're performing? Because they are the ones that are being held to these standards. And so as we talk about tough working conditions and longer hours and all of these things, are we arming our operators with the appropriate tools for them to have the conversations that are necessary for them to get their job done in a reasonable and acceptable fashion? And are the metrics that they're being graded upon readily available for them to review so they can make positive changes in real time to actually impact the operation? If we continually say at the end of the shift, hey, you didn't meet your numbers, are we doing enough to arm them real time to meet those numbers? Or are we harping on them at the end of the day? And so that's some of the encouragement that I often offer in these situations, is make sure that as much information as we want, as we have, we need to make sure that we're appropriately distributing that information in a fashion that allows the people that are actually doing the things, putting the money in the box, we need them to be as versed in the information, if not more so than us. All right, so next we'll talk a little bit about prioritization of resources, and there's certainly a lot of overlap here because we talk about the visualization, we talk about the capture of the data, we talk about why it's important, and that is certainly because we need to prioritize our existing resources. As we deal with labor constraints, as we deal with things in the market that are pushing conditions into, kind of unseen territory. We've got a huge boom in demand in a lot of different industries. If you look at retail alone, grocery sales are up 15% year over year. And that is a big, big boom for a particular segment of our food industry clients. Now, couple that with labor challenges, then you've got a real prioritization problem. If you cannot effectively prioritize your existing resources, it's going to be very tough to address the modern market, the modern day. So a lot of the conversation we've had so far is about particularly maintenance and downtime and how are we addressing these things. And one of the themes that I see consistently throughout my travels is, especially trained employees tend to be dealing with the people that are screaming the loudest. Now, I might ask the group here, is dealing with the person that's screaming the loudest oftentimes the best use of their time? Or should we be looking for a way to support a data-backed approach that says, hey, I realize that your line is down, but we've got 3 of these folks, we've got 27 lines, and that particular line A over there is actually our high volume, high margin line that we need to get back up and running before we get our line B up. And so how do we make sure that we're effectively prioritizing and not just responding to the firefighting mentality, who's screaming the loudest? And then that kind of leads me down the path of talking about how are we capturing some of this stuff. oftentimes the people that are screaming the loudest are manually aggregating information in their head. They think this particular issue is a big loss leader, or is the most important thing in the facility. But we've got a lot of manual processes recording data, and we've got no real way of saying, yes, that is true. You are the priority element, or they have generally no idea where they sit with respect to what they're doing or how they're doing it. And so that manual data collection, that manual process that we're allowing them to capture their downtime data, or we're having them capture their downtime data for recollection's sake, might be prone to error. And by that, I mean, if we're capturing data in a manual process, we're capturing our downtimes, we're saying, hey, machine X was down for 27 minutes today. Is that 27 minutes that the operator remembers? Is that 27 minutes that a machine spit out a code that told us, yes, it was in fact down for that 27 minutes? If we don't have that level of granularity, how do we best prioritize our existing resources? And so that's the question I ask a lot. At what level of detail are we able and confidently able to say, yes, this is in fact a priority line for us. We know it's our number one margin product. We know it's our the most sold, highest volume. We absolutely need to hit this order for us to be successful. We know that because it's costed that way. We know that because it's sold that way. But how are we explaining that to our operators on the floor? How are we getting that information directly in front of the people that are implementing and influencing the results that we're seeing out the door? And so if we're reliant on manual processes, we tend to see a little bit more error prone nature there. And we seem to see a little bit more disagreements. And by this, I might reference an A shift versus B shift conflict that's very consistent, that I've seen throughout my tenure. A shift might have a particular machine that they're running. They've got A shift settings, and then B shift comes in and they immediately change settings. And I'm not sure anyone on the line listening out there today, if they've got a very similar situation in their plant. But if you say no, you would certainly be one of the very few plants that I've ever dealt with, or that I've ever heard from, that would say no to that. We have a very inconsistent methodology in some of these manual processes, and that opens the door for some of these people to say, hey, my way's the best way, and that way might be very different than the way they did it on the same line, same piece of equipment, same day, just different shift. And those types of problems exist because we have the inability to prioritize and focus on the actual results, the actual data that we're capturing from those pieces of equipment, and people lack the visibility into the outcomes. All right, so natural segue, we do see a lot, or oftentimes, that groups are very reliant on outdated processes, and food manufacturing in particular, and I'm going to harp on this segment in general, but food manufacturing in particular tends to look for something that works quickly now. And by that, I mean, there might be a sophisticated software system in place. There might be a little bit of paper sprinkled throughout. There might be some record keeping that is done digitally as well as manually captured. But we tend to see a lot of disparate systems, not a single source of truth for these operations that are doing this kind of glue board, stick things to the walls to see where they fit. And so you walk into an operation that's got a sophisticated ERP, you've got a warehouse management system, you've got different, single point solutions that capture a particular set of data for maybe the labs. You've got a different set of solutions that captures some productivity data. You've got some quality data over here, and then you've got some manual form data over here. All these processes aren't necessarily intertwined, and it leads to an interesting conundrum where we've got a lot of data. It's not necessarily all organized, and this leads to delays in the analysis of said data. and the ability to actually address the problem. Collecting data is an absolute fundamental process that we all should be striving to make sure we're well heeled and doing the right things. But collecting data for the sake of data is not actually doing much. We have to be able to quickly analyze and interpret that data for us to make some actionable decisions. If we're not actioning our data, then there's not much point in collecting it to begin with. Going through the historical archives of 2 years worth of data doesn't really help me solve today. It can certainly shine lights on problems. It can certainly go through we can go through the paces of analyzing how we got to where we are. But if we want to look at data in a way that's actionable, we really ought to be focused on today and how real time that data can be and how quickly we can gather that data and organize about it. Another point of contention here is certainly who is accountable should the line go down. What steps should be taken? How do we minimize the downtime? And if we're looking at outdated processes, if we're trying to glue all of this information back together, we tend to be a little bit slow to act because we're in that kind of analysis phase for as long as possible. And when we're analyzing and analyzing and analyzing, and we're looking over here in Excel, and we've got our SAP or our ERP type systems over here, and we're trying to glue all this information together, we are actively taking away time that we could be contributing to solving a problem. And so the organization of the data becomes very important, and then that helps us action it. If we can't do that in our outdated processes, then it could be time for us to look for a solution that allows us to get more of this information under one hood and allow us quicker access to that information so we can actually turn it into actionable items that we can then affix with our resources that are now hopefully better prioritized, and then we can detect and address the inconsistencies. And that to me is absolutely mission critical. If we cannot address some of these inconsistencies that we're seeing, it becomes a very big black hole for the organization, and we start funneling more and more stuff into it, and it spirals into a monster that no one really wants to deal with. And then you get some of the crosstalk that happens back and forth, and it becomes a he said, she said game that doesn't really amount to much. And that's where we see stalls in continuous improvement efforts, because we're capturing so much data, but we're not necessarily prioritizing or focusing on the right areas, and that becomes a big issue. A story I like to kind of weave in here about an operation that I worked with. I had a pretty large tortilla manufacturer, a very big domestic business, have a pretty decent international presence as well, but had two identical lines in one facility. They're next to each other, line one and line two. They are immediately next to each other. The operators can talk to each other. Those operators had been in the facility for 10 or 15 years each. They are very seasoned. They know the equipment. They know the processes. And they're often fighting the same issues. They're often having similar concerns about the product, the downtime, the quality. There's consistencies within those two lines that they absolutely should be there. They're identical. They're built by the same people. They were installed the same days. All of these things are very much identical, but the operators themselves talk about the problems a little bit differently. The communication is missing. So there was a particular problem with the press one day on both lines. The dough was a little bit maybe too moist. There was a couple of things that could have led to some confusion in the process, but these operators were coding the downtime inconsistent. They were saying, hey, my downtime's caused by reason A, and then operator B was saying my downtime's caused by reason B. So maintenance gets sent over to operator A on the line, and they say, hey, what's going on over here? And he explains, this is what's going on, this is what I'm seeing. So maintenance does their troubleshooting and they get the issue fixed. Operator B has the exact same issue, but he talks about it a little bit differently. So we send the maintenance tech over, and the maintenance tech in that particular instance has to go back through his root cause analysis and try to get to the root cause before you can get a corrective action. When if they had just spoken about the problem the same way, you would have already known how to address it immediately and fix it. We went through and digitized a lot of their processes. We got them speaking consistently about their downtime. And through that, over the course of the year, they were at about a $1.4 million labor variance swing because they organized about their data in a way that they hadn't before. They made sure that they were speaking the same about the same problems. They made sure they weren't having some of these communication issues back and forth because they had organized about the data. And that allowed them to see in real time a lot closer level of detail to the operation, what became very mission critical data for them, and allowed them to address some of this labor variance that they were seeing. So jumping into the next poll question here, do you know right now, today, the number one reason for downtime on your highest volume line?
This is gonna be good. We're getting our votes in. They're coming in. Matt, that story about the tortilla maker, amazing. Um, I can imagine this happening pretty much everywhere. That point you made about the different languages, that was kind of huge. You have to align everybody on a single, we'll just say defined verbiage and actions for things.
Absolutely, and it's kind of interesting to see as you travel around and you deal with some of these organizations. Um, there is a common thread. The inconsistency there is we think two people are speaking differently, but no, you're bringing in a third party as well. You're bringing in maintenance. We all have to be speaking the same about that particular piece of equipment to effectively address it. And so that is one of the chief concerns that I have when I'm going into an organization, is making sure that we are speaking the same about the data that we're capturing, about the things that we're seeing, in a manner that is consistent, that leads to quicker decision making and quicker action on that downtime.
Yeah, 100%. All right, looks like we've got about 60% of the votes coming in. I'm gonna close the poll right now. Let's see what we've got here. Looks like 47% have a decent idea, but we'll need to verify that information.
I like the what's downtime 7%. I appreciate those folks out there. I have a very dry sense of humor, so I hope somebody got a chuckle out of it anyway. So yeah, this is pretty consistent across the board. We've got a pretty good range of what's going on. Depending upon the day is an interesting answer, right? Some things we're a little bit more concerned about than others. So we might have a little bit more focus. We might, be running a new product on a particular line that we're hoping is going to take off, and we've got a lot of eyes on it. So we might have really good downtime that particular day, or we might have a really good understanding of our line that particular day. But in the following days, we're running our normal product mix, and we might lose some of that steadfastness, and we might lose some of that ability to go ahead and capture that data, or even demonstrate a level of concern about that data. And so the reason I asked that question is I really do want to make sure that people understand the importance of visibility. If we can't tell what is crippling our highest volume line right now, if we don't have a very good understanding of that, then how are we expected to drive any kind of results in our facility? How are we expected to be better tomorrow if we can't understand how we're doing right now? And so my encouragement to everybody with respect to downtime is making sure that this is a mission critical item in our KPI stack. And absolutely it is. Across the board, 100% of the organizations I work with are very concerned about downtime. They're very concerned about how their line is performing currently, but they don't always have the ability to clarify and visualize and say, yes, 100%, this is the number one reason that's plaguing me today. And if I don't have that answer, then how am I supposed to tell my maintenance person? How am I supposed to tell the people that are in charge of the line to get the product out the door? How am I supposed to help them get better? if I can't actually explain it. And so if I can't quantify it, if I can't put some numbers to it, it's tough for me to relay the importance. And then we fall back into the same old firefighting mode. It's whoever's screaming loudest, maintenance comes to the rescue. And sometimes people are screaming really loud about a process that does not move the needle very much, but they win because they were a very loud voice. And so some steps here to kind of help garner more efficiency out of our operation that are very consistent that I've seen throughout my tenure is data capture. Absolutely, we want to make sure that we are capturing data. We want to make sure that it's valuable data, and that data is something that we all understand where it's coming from, whether it be manually collected. We need to have a an organization about how we collect that data. Is it important for them to capture the data almost immediately after getting the line back up to speed, so they have it fresh in their memory? Or is it important for us to pull a PLC tag so the machine tells us the time, and then maybe the operator explains the reason code? There's a lot of different ways to get the data about the processes, and it certainly can come from machines. It certainly can come from process steps. It can come from digital forms, all different types of data that we can work with. But my suggestion is, as much as possible, we should probably try to automate. Automation is key to really moving that needle, because as rudimentary as some of this information is, the ability to have it directly recorded from a machine that captures things in real-time windows, that really expands our capability to deal with that data. And then it also allows us to remove some manual processes, which might or might not be prone to some error. And then we really certainly want to visualize. We need some sort of meaningful description of this data. And a quick way to do that is put some visualizations in front of people. But I don't necessarily want to put visualizations of real-time stuff that is happening on the production floor in front of a corporate officer that is sitting in their office, way away from the plant floor. I certainly want these visuals and this data to be put in front of people that are actually doing the things that we're selling. These people are putting money in a box. We should make sure they're armed with as up-to-date information as possible. And we can do that through systems that have built-in alerts, trigger mechanisms that say, hey, line is down, what are we doing about it? And here's, this line's been down for 60 minutes. How do we address a corrective action so it doesn't go down for another 60 minutes? All that being put right in front of the people that do the work. Then we certainly want to analyze. We want to make sure that we are determining any kind of trends with the data. This can help shape our PM programs. Like I said, we can talk about the TPM realm, but we need to understand that base state. We need to get to a point where we're at, where we're comfortable with the data that's coming in, and then we get to the analysis step that allows us to be a little bit more thorough, build out our mechanisms for proactively identifying issues versus just reactively firefighting. And lastly, we certainly want to operationalize some of this stuff. We want to get things going in the right direction in the plant. And so if we can get these elements in place, we can align our teams a lot better. We can help with the prioritization of things on the line, and the process itself becomes more robust. We've got more responsive folks, and in a proactive manner, not necessarily just firefighting. And all of this increases the accountability for the folks that are doing the work. It allows them to be more in control. It gives us greater understanding of what's going on right now, and we have the ability to say, hey, these are the metrics, these are the numbers in front of you. This is what we're all seeing, and so we get that alignment and the accountability all kind of shaped into one nice little bundle. All right, so that's 40 some odd minutes of me yammering at you folks. I hope there were interesting tidbits in there, and certainly want to open it up now for questions if anybody's got any.
Yes, that's right. We're getting some questions in, Matt, and thank you so much. You know what? One of the reasons why I got so excited about you being on Beyond Compliance is the fact that you have been in 183 facilities just outside of your own experience.
Hmm.
asking the right questions, making sure people are getting aligned. I mean, that is huge. Asking the right questions, it's just one of those simplest things, but doing it the right way gets everybody aligned to those processes. So I'm going to take a question here from Rick. He says, how do you align on the standard process when there are so many different groups and flavors of how they operate? So it's a little high level, but essentially, yes, to your point, you gave a few examples earlier. When you have line A and line B, they're kind of seeing the same thing, but they're speaking about it differently, and then they might go about it differently because there's no standardized process in place. How do you bridge that gap and build that more standardized process?
So the primary focus for me is to make sure that everybody involved in the process actually has a stake in the game and they understand where the information is coming from. And so what we need to do is we need to organize ourselves about how to talk about systems, how to talk about changeovers on line one are way different than changeovers on line two. Those are two different conversations. We need to be very knowledgeable about how we get that detail and have the people that are doing the work contribute to the conversation. This shouldn't be a dictation. This shouldn't be something that comes down from on high. This should be an organization effort that says, hey, you three are my chief operators on this particular process. This is my chief maintenance person on this process. Let's get you three to talk about how we organize about this and open that conversation up to the folks that are doing the work. That will lead to a much more fruitful conversation. They'll bridge those gaps themselves because, again, falling back on my tortilla alignment story, like uh, we talk about a very interesting thing. Those two lines were identical and they had the same kind of communication gaps that would be expected in an operation that has two very different lines. And so even if the lines are the same, you still run into that problem. And the way to fix it is to get those folks organized about the information. You need to have them talk about how better to communicate their needs, their understanding of the process, and that helps us open up the world of are we properly trained? Are we focused on the right things? Maybe operator A didn't realize the importance of something that operator B understands, and so having that conversation is the way to kind of bridge that gap. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
yeah, it does. And obviously, I mean, you mentioned folks on the actual plant floor, but it goes beyond that, right? So you
Yep.
need to align to those business goals, and you need to kind of like create tiers of information that needs to be presented, and then of course bring it back down to what data are we going to capture to feed into those different dashboards or what are reports, things that essentially folks beyond the plant need to see.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
So let's actually talk about the data. Obviously, the theme of this webinar is shining the light on things that maybe you may not have visibility to. So can you give some examples of line metrics that are generally not looked at that should be?
Uh, to be honest, I mean, it's not so much as what's not looked at, it's what's not looked at in time. Most organizations have some metric that they're capturing. They believe that OEE is the end all be all, or they believe that downtime's the end all be all, or they believe that throughput's the end all be all. Like all of these things are measured in some way, shape, or form, but it's more of a gap with respect to who is seeing that information when. Because if I'm holding my operator to a standard and they're being measured against that standard, but the only time they actually get to see uh, that standard being met is at the end of shift when they're running a shift report or the next day when they start their shift. We're not really arming them with as much information as they could possibly have to succeed. And so the CI nature of it, the continuous improvement nature of it kind of falls by the wayside because we're looking at yesterday's data to solve today's problems. And so I don't know if there's anything really consistent that's being missed. It's more how it's being conveyed to the people that need it would be more of a concern for me.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, speaking of holding operators to a standard, this question just came in. Examples? Oh, can you provide examples of getting line workers more invested in business goals and how you track it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so one of the chief things that I always do when I'm working with an operation is I want to make sure that people understand what is the point of control for the things that are going out the door. Who has the most information about that? And the way that we can kind of flip the script a little bit is emphasizing the importance of the operator on the floor that are doing the things that we sell. They're making the stuff that we sell. And so organizing about how to get more information in front of them, opening up the conversation and saying, hey, this is really important to the business. You guys are mission critical. You guys are the focus here. We want to help support you. This is coming from a place of, hey, we want to be here to support the operation, and you are that operation. You guys put this stuff in a box that we sell. Without those boxes going out the door, none of us get paid. And so demonstrating that level of understanding and making sure that you know the operators on the floor understand that leadership supports the initiative that they have is a great way to kind of influence people in a positive direction, but also making sure that they understand that you are invested in the outcome as well. You guys are paying attention to it. There's kind of an immediate payback on some visualization tools because people generally, if they know that they're being watched, they're going to perform a little bit better. And so that's kind of an interesting concept. But if they know that they're being watched and they're able to watch it themselves, you get an even bigger bump because the people are ultimately showing up to work to work. They want to do the best that they can. As long as we have a supportive structure that says, hey, we're here to support the things that you think need to get done. We're here to have these conversations. We want to make sure that we organize about this. And so every single operation I work with is we sit down and have these conversations. We stress the importance of how to get or what we're doing and why we're doing it, and who is absolutely critical in that uh, in providing input to these conversations is the operators themselves. And so engaging with them directly, opening up the conversations and talking directly to the people that are doing the stuff, that demonstrates a level of commitment that they probably or might not be used to seeing. And that alone will drive some results. Just having that conversation and then arming them further with the tools uh, and showing them, hey, this is the metrics that we're looking at consistently. These are the things we care about. That opens that door for them to understand a little bit more. This is bigger than me, but also I have a direct impact on the results. And so that the kind of the shift there from being um, in the dark about how we're performing to in the light is a very big shift, and it tends to be a very positive shift if done well.
Ooh, so profound. All right, we've got 2 minutes left, and I want to get this question from Zinnia. What types of programs, you mentioned the tools, so what types of programs do you recommend for managing all of this information? Yeah, how do you reduce the complexity of it, right? Because we're trying to connect a lot of devices, machines,
Mhm.
even on the people front, right, through different mechanisms. How do you get it all together? What programs would you recommend?
Well, I'd certainly talk about something that's very integratable, something that has a visualization tool to it. Safety Chain's a good example. Safety Chain is very flexible, open to a lot of different communication protocols, open to it. We've got various APIs, webhooks, that kind of stuff that allow us to pull information from varying sources. But the idea is to distill it down into measurable or important chunks, I should say, that makes sense to the folks that are looking at it. And so we want to make sure that we can organize all of this information, but also in a fashion that makes sense. We don't need every single PLC tag being demonstrated or shown in kind of a long list of Excel based output or table based outputs. We need more distilled, carefully curated information, and using a platform, that this is hosted by Safety Chain. Using a platform like Safety Chain is a great way to do that. You've got the ability to see your productivity metrics. You've got your ability to pull your quality data in. You've got your ability to see your SPC data, your line performance data, all of those things under one roof. And then the cool added bonus is you can integrate with your ERP system. You can look at different levels of things that are going on in the broader systems, but honing that down into one kind of single source of truth, if you will. And the idea is you really do want to distill all of this stuff down into its most direct, usable form. And a platform like Safety Chain does allow you to do that. And so certainly if there's more conversations about distinctions in the platform itself, I know there's some folks that can help us there. But I think as far as platforms go, Safety Chain is certainly one good mechanism to get this thing done.
All right, good, good, good. Hey, Matt Snyder, I think you're cooler than Harry Styles himself. So thank you, my friend, for being part of Beyond Compliance. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It is the last day of the month, so I'm sure you're making your vacation plans. So everybody be safe, have fun. We're looking forward to seeing you on the next Beyond Compliance. If you're looking for some really great information that you want to read on the weekend, check out our content download section on safetychain.com. You're going to find a bunch of stuff, whether you're in packaging or food and beverage. We've got everything there for you. Please do check it out. My name is Jim Albright. I'm very happy to be hanging out with y'all. Thank you again to Matt, and I hope y'all a very good rest of your day.